after my heart was crushed for mankind being so depraved. What have I got myself into? I'm in deep trouble. And
Mhm.
sure enough, I was followed from church that night. I was apprehended by government agents outside of CNN trying to get the videotape of the fake footage to reporter there. I was given true serum.
One second. There we go. Welcome everyone to Prove to Me that You're Alive. Oh man, today, some call this guy a conspiracy theorist, but those that know anything in the world call him a truth teller, a whistleblower. You know, when I was getting ready for this show, man, I had this epiphany. I've been blessed with epiphanies. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, bro, this is one of the most important people of the 20th century. Just think about this. He was the first person basically to tell us and America and the whole world that look, your government might be lying to you, man. And he had the courage enough to do that, man. They and not only the government might be lying to you about anything, that they might be lying to you about such things as the Apollo 11 moon landing, man. I really want you guys to grasp this. You know, they tried to silence him, they tried to chase him, they threatened him, they tried to cancel him, but guess what? He's still here, man. And he wrote a wonderful book, Moon Man: The True Story of a Filmmaker. He hosts his own his own YouTube, excuse me, and I will leave all the links in the description. He has given the world wonderful documentary films such as A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, An Astronaut Gone Wild, Apollo 11 Monkey Business, Apollo 11 Post-Flight Press Conference, and he has recently gone toe-to-toe with a heavyweight such as Joe Rogan. And in my humble opinion, he stood his ground as always. Today, we have the man, the myth, the legend here, man. A true freedom fighter, man. Bart Sibrel. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you, Naz. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much. Listen, have you grasped this notion ever that you're actually one of the most important people of the 20th century?
No, that's the first time I've heard that, but I appreciate the compliment.
No, no,
But
but do you realize why I am saying this?
not really, but I do recognize something that came to my mind. I grew up believing the moon landings are real, and maybe more so. Almost worshipped them with a shrine to Apollo 11 in my house for over a decade. And then when I became a filmmaker whose job is to make fake scenes look real, I started picking up that this is electrical lighting, not sunlight. And just go to Sibrel.com. On the homepage is a 3-minute video
I
where I
will leave
show
all the
you that
links.
in sunlight, shadows are parallel, and in electrical lighting, they can intersect. And there's moon pictures that intersect 90-degree shadows from objects 5 feet apart, which is 100% scientific proof that it's an electrical light, which means they're not on the moon, which means they didn't go. And here we are 55 years later, and we still cannot leave Earth orbit with a human. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. So, what I realized as I started investigating this is sort of what you're saying, Nas, that if they faked it, and now I know that they actually did fake it, which is just so sad when you realize that.
Mm.
It's more profound of an event historically than if they'd actually gone. So if you could say we have two possibilities, they either went, planted a flag with 1960s technology on the first attempt ahead of schedule and came back, but that was a close one, or the most powerful nation on earth that claims to be righteous and freedom
Mm.
loving and truth loving lied about what would be considered to be the greatest event in human history, deceived their own people, murdered people to cover it up, printed it on stamps, on coins, gave these guys medals of honor for being such good liars. If that's true, which it is, That's so much more profound an event. So what we have is one of the greatest events of the 20th century isn't putting a man on the moon. It's the faking of putting a man on the moon.
Wow.
And unlike Who Killed JFK, whoever did it, it's still a negative, depressing event. Whoever did 9/11, it's still 3,000 people dying. This is different. This is a positive lie
Mhm.
that the American people wanted to believe. And they don't want to give it up. A lot of them. I've talked to college professors who said even if an Apollo astronaut confessed on national TV that the
Mhm.
moon missions were fake, that he would think he walked on the moon anyway. I mean, it's literally a god to people. And what does this mean? When you've seen my film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. We
Yeah.
uncovered footage of them faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes,
Mhm.
dated 2 days into the flight with the third track of audio from the CIA telling them how to fake it better. And when you realize that they really did fake the moon landing, it's such a sad state just for mankind that we're so deprived and really juvenile that we can't tell the truth that we set a goal and couldn't do it and spent billions upon billions of dollars, an equivalent, I think they're saying now, $270 billion with inflation. And then, not my testimony, the testimony of relatives of dead Apollo astronauts who told me that they were murdered by the CIA for not participating in corruption having to do with the Apollo fraud. And that's sad. Well, that means we're paying a third of our taxes to the corrupt federal government that's so corrupt. Not only are they faking moon landings and keeping 75% of the money for who knows what, they're
Mhm.
using that money from our labor to pay the salaries of CIA agents who killed our brethren who were trying to expose their crimes. When it dawns on you that the most powerful, well-intended, founded country,
Mhm.
is doing that, and they're still at large. I mean, that's like saying one child disappears in your neighborhood every month, been going on for 55 years. Oh, well, one of those things.
And you don't do
No, we
nothing
need to
about
do something about it. This is
it.
dangerous. The people who faked the moon landing are at large. Our government still claims that they went to the moon when they did not. They murdered people to cover it up, and they're running the show. Murderers, embezzlers, gangsters are running the most powerful country in the
Yeah.
world and lying without reason. When Clinton was asked, President Clinton, why he had the affair after
Mhm.
denying it 20 times, he said,
Mhm.
because I could get away with it. Why did they fake the moon landing? Because they could get away with it. The dead man's own relatives of JFK say he was murdered by the CIA. So after they got away with that, and then former defense secretary said they invented the reason for the start of the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin attack, never happened, according
You
to the defense secretary before he died,
you
right?
were a
They passed
key
a law.
you
Yeah.
were you were a key into that uncovery as well. I'm sorry for cutting you off. I
Oh,
just
go
i,
ahead.
I want to get into all of this stuff, and me being from Ukraine, trust me, I know exactly what's going on behind the closed doors, right? Well, I have an idea. And when someone asks me always whose fault it is, you know what I say it's my fault and it's your fault, because
It is.
we are putting
Yeah.
these people in these positions, and they are sick individuals. But Bart, before we go on, will you please join my club and acknowledge the fact that you are perhaps one of the most important people of the 20th century? And I say this with absolute seriousness, because you were the first to kind of open the population's eyes to even the possibility that the government could be lying on such a scale.
Well, there were people before me. I mean, one of my key people I interviewed was someone who worked at NASA for 6 years during the Apollo program. He wrote a book called We Never Went to the Moon. He was one of the first guests on the Oprah Winfrey show in the 1980s. He said they didn't go to the moon. They immediately tried to discredit him, but he was, had second highest security clearance to von Braun, who made the rocket, and said von Braun put in writing to the Pentagon that they cannot go to the moon by Kennedy's goal. If they try, there's a 99.99% chance they're going to kill the crew. And we found publications from von Braun's own mathematical calculations that says it's impossible to go to the moon in one rocket. There's not enough fuel. And here we are, Elon Musk is saying the same thing. It's going to take at least 8 trips. A scientist just had a talk recently who said it may take 24 fuel trips to have enough fuel. And yet somehow they went in one rocket. See, the rocket never left Earth orbit. The footage we uncovered is them faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. The Saturn V did not have enough fuel to leave Earth orbit. That's why, Elon Musk says to go to the moon today, it's going to take 8 fuel trips or more. So everything becomes more efficient over time. I mean, light bulbs are brighter with less electricity than they were 55 years ago. So it should take less fuel and less trips, less effort to go to the moon today, but it takes more because they bluffed, like in poker. And this is just the way that it is. And so I don't know what my specialty is. I certainly didn't intend on it being the spokesperson of We Didn't Go to the Moon. However, my book that you mentioned, which is in audio that I read myself or Kindle or print at Sibrel.com, it has 17 interactive video links that back up everything I'm saying. I write a chapter and then I say, go to Sibrel.com, Moon Man, link 1, link 2, so forth. And I show you the classified footage of fake photography. I show you a NASA employee saying they don't have the technology to leave Earth orbit to this day. So how did they do it in 1969 with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone? You can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. That's a scientific and historic impossibility. That would be like saying Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, and here we are. We still can't do it. No nation can do it. We destroyed the technology to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. No. Now there's millions of aircraft, 100,000 times more advanced. So if we could go to the moon in 1969 and play golf on it, we would be on Mars 10 years later and be in another solar system by now. So the fact that we can today only go 1,000th the distance to the moon with a human being means they didn't go back then, whether you accept it or not. And it's amazing. I did the Joe Rogan interview, which you mentioned, and then some, quote, scientist says, I am a science denier. He's the one who's denying science. Von Braun said, you can't go to the moon in one rocket, not me. NASA engineer said the technology to leave Earth orbit hasn't been invented yet. He's the one who's anti-science. It's amazing. They call it Apollo, which is a fake god, and the guy is worshiping a god. I mean, if a scientist like him says, if an Apollo astronaut confessed that the moon missions were fake, he would still think he walked on the moon anyway. They're the ones who are anti-science. They're denying eyewitness testimony. They're denying the mathematical figures of their own rocket designer. They want to believe in this great, glorious Apollo god that is a false god. And what does the Bible says? Says people worship the work of their hands.
Idol
And that's what
worship.
they're doing.
You know what? You're probably gonna hate me for saying this. You know what really ticked me off about the Joe Rogan interview? And I don't know if he was I don't know if he was doing it just because, as he said, he was kind of trying to play the devil's advocate. But I'm like watching the interview and I'm screaming at the screen, like, do you realize that this man dedicated his whole life into studying this subject? Like, how are you arguing with someone that has dedicated literally their entire life into studying the subject? So was he being comical or was he being serious when he was challenging you this last interview?
Well, you have to ask him that.
Okay.
Why he did what he did, for what reasons. I can see that there's benefit from it because I answered every typical argument
Yeah.
that people claim, proves that they went to the moon. Like, why wouldn't Russia or China spill the beans? Well, because they'd rather blackmail us. It's much more valuable, rather than giving the free information to the world that the moon missions are fake, to blackmail us. And as you know from a recent video I uploaded at Sibrel.com, we have a Chinese space agency employee saying, yeah, we all know they faked the moon landing, and we're blackmailing NASA to give us technology that Congress forbids them to give, so they won't spill the beans about the moon landing fraud. So they faked the moon landing. I mean, I don't know how clear it could be. We have a video of them using a 1 foot model to pretend that they're halfway to the moon, dated 2 days into the flight, with a third track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay to make it look like they're beyond Earth orbit.
Mhm.
I mean, come on. Today, with 50 years better rockets and computers, they can only send an astronaut 1,000th the distance to the moon than they did with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone. And
Mhm.
Elon Musk says it's going to take 8 rockets to go, and somehow they did it on one. I mean, come on. I don't know how much more proof do you need. I gave them the benefit of the doubt as long as possible. But when you have a video of them faking being halfway to the moon with the 1 foot model of the Earth, dated 2 days into the flight, what can you say? They did fake it. And then everything makes sense. Then
Mhm.
everything falls into place. Oh, that's why they can't go today. That's why it appears that for the first time in history, greater technology was in the past and in the future. Oh, that's why 2 of the 3 don't give interviews. Oh, that's why they look like they're at the funeral of their mother during the press conference. Oh, that's why the administrator resigned. Oh, that's why the crew that was going to be the first crew to walk on the moon, who wouldn't cooperate with the fraud, was murdered by the CIA, according to the
Mhm.
dead man's own wife and son. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but they did fake the moon landing. And that's a very profound event in human history, much
Super.
more so than if they had actually gone.
Super. I want to get into all of that in detail in as much time as we have. But before the myth, before the legend, if you could please tell us a bit about your childhood. And I think it's very important because your life path kind of led you. It's like you were destined to do what you are doing. What was your childhood like? Who were some of your heroes? And if you could tell us about that turning point when things changed for you.
Well, my father was in the Air Force, and we know now from Bill Casing, he said the faking of the moon landing was supervised by the United States Air Force. And then not only do we have all this proof, shadows intersecting, which that proves it. That's it. It's over. You can't have shadows intersecting at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart in sunlight. It's electrical light, which means they're on Earth, which means they didn't go. You can prove the moon landings are fake with one picture. Then we have them using a 1 foot model to pretend it's the Earth floating in space. That proves it. Then we have the fact that you can't have greater technology in the past and in the future. That proves it. And then, believe it or not, we have an eyewitness who was chief of security at the Air Force's most secure, top secret Air Force base, which isn't Area 51. It's Cannon Air Force Base of Special Operations. Before he died, he said he murdered a coworker, wanted to get that off his chest when the military police came in to investigate who you killed. He said, well, I killed them, on this date, and here's their name. And they said, why did you kill them? He said to cover up the moon landing fraud, which we both eyewitnessed them film on a fake moon landing set in Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. And you don't make that stuff up as you're dropping dead. We have an eyewitness. So, my dad being in the Air Force, I grew up thinking aerospace and airplanes were great. And when he got this VIP package of Apollo 11 pictures, gave them to me as a present. And that was the shrine I created of these 10 to 20 pictures on my bedroom wall at the age of 4 to 14. And then when I saw Bill Casing, who was the guest on Oprah, say we didn't go to the moon, I'm like, oh, never thought of that. I'm an open minded 14-year-old, right? I start looking at the pictures, and sure enough, the background seems to be artificial. It's like real soil up to a certain point, and then it looks like it's a backdrop. And I'm like, that's interesting. Then I become a filmmaker, and I end up producing a show or editing a show for the guy who made the TV show I saw 10 years earlier. And I'm like, who was that guy on your show who said we didn't go to the moon? I'm put in touch with him. He suggests I do a film about it. And I turned down the project because I
Mm.
realized something's not right about this. There's a real possibility they did fake it. And if I start looking into this, it could be dangerous. I don't want to risk my life for what Nixon did. Who cares?
Mm.
I turn it down. And
Mm.
then after I read the Bible about 5 times from cover to cover over the next 5 years, I realized there is right or wrong. There is a judgment for how we live our life. It's just logical. And if they faked the moon landing, then that's more significant than if they'd actually gone. And it's a hidden truth, like a cure for cancer. Mankind would needs to know. We can't have a great awakening. We could know who shot JFK, who did 9/11, the cure for cancer. But if people still think they went to the moon when they didn't, and if the government still lies about that sweet candy that people don't want to give up, there is no great awakening. We have to know. And it would be a profound event for the truth to come out. I would say logically, it's not going to come out. They're doing such a good job deceiving the world and embezzling money and lying and murdering their own people. However, spiritually, I
Mm.
think it might. My film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, on the homepage of Sibrel.com, opens up with the Tower of Babel,
Yeah.
which the Bible says was simply made to show off and it
Hmm.
was never finished.
Hmm.
And the Messiah said to start building something and to not finish it, you look like a fool. Then they show the Titanic in my movie, right? Which they put in print, the ship that God Himself could not sink.
Hmm. Yep.
You see?
Yep.
So the unfinished Tower of Babel was a rebuke to the world. The ship that God Himself cannot sink was a rebuke to the world.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon, when he knew they were not on the moon, said, "Putting a man on the moon is the greatest event since God made the universe."
Wow.
You see? Now that rebuke hasn't been known yet.
Hmm.
Maybe the delay of that rebuke will make it all the more profound
Wow.
because people have believed this lie for so long, and so many people went out of their way to make all these videos to defend the moon landing fraud. Let me point out something. If I went around saying Mickey Mouse was the first president of the United States, not George Washington, do you really think there'd be 1,000 videos to defend the fact that George Washington was really the first president? Don't listen to Bart, he's
Right.
wrong. No, who would care? If they
Mhm.
really went to the moon and it wasn't such a fragile amount of evidence to claim that they went, and it's fragile, it wouldn't need all this defending. People say, I have no intention of ever making a video to refute what I said. And then
Mhm.
they a day later make a video that must have taken them 100 hours to make to refute my assertion, my factualness that they faked the moon landing because it's a god to them.
Mm.
I don't know what to say. If a college professor says an admission from an Apollo astronaut of it being fake isn't good enough, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. And if the guy who calls me anti-science denies the rocket designer's own writing,
Mm.
and it's in my book and it's in my movie Astronauts Gone Wild, he says it's impossible to go to the moon in one rocket. The minimum would be 3 rockets, but each of the 3 would have to weigh 10 times the amount of the Queen Mary, taller than the Empire State
Wow.
Building, and each would weigh 800,000 tons. The Saturn V was only 2,500 tons, not 800,000 tons.
Mm.
Difference of 30,000% times 3.
Right.
You see? So the rocket designer said they couldn't go to the moon in one rocket. A scientist on YouTube just said it. He thinks it may take 24 fuel trips.
Wow.
Elon Musk says a minimum of 8. And then we have a NASA engineer, one of the clips at Sibrel.com,
Yeah.
saying there's a radiation field that's deadly, and the technology to go through it and survive has not been invented yet.
Mm.
So I don't know which more proof you need. If people, can't see the truth, they don't want to see it. And the New Testament says in the last days there will be counterfeit miracles. Putting a man on the moon's a modern day miracle and it's
Sounds
counterfeit.
like.
And it says that they choose to believe the lie. Why
Mm.
does that scientist say that a confession of Neil Armstrong would not dissuade him from believing the moon landings are real? That's a science denier. That's a fact denier. So why is that? It's just like the New Testament warns. They want to believe the lie. They would rather have cocaine wrapped around in sugar,
Mhm.
right, than a bad tasting medicine that makes them well. So be it. I would rather have the latter.
You say such powerful things sometimes. I think that a lot of times it goes over people's heads. When I listen to you, a lot of things that you say are so profound. My question is, was there one thing that completely convinced you that you were on the right track, and the moon landing was in fact fake? Like, was there a moment, was there an epiphany, or was it like a gradual thing for you?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, it was gradual up to a point. The shadows intersecting the background, not matching, the behavior of the astronauts seeming odd. All that's kind of like a smell. I don't. I still remember 12 years old. We would explore condemned buildings. I was like the ringleader, or buildings under construction. They'd become our forts, and we go underneath this one, condemned building. There's this bad stink. It's like,
Mm,
what the heck is that stink? And we find a dead cat, probably, died 2, 3 months earlier. And so before you find the cat, there's a stink. So you
mm,
have an inclination that there's something dead in there, right? And in a spiritual sense, there was this inclination. The two of the three astronauts don't give interviews. The administrator resigned. The shadows intersect. The backgrounds don't match the foreground. It's like a smell, a spiritual smell of something being off. And there's a little bit of fear in there. Not afraid that they're going to kill me if I find something, but more like this is wicked. This is
mm,
evil. This is not right in the world of morality. And then the epiphany comes in July of 1999, where I pop in a tape that says don't show to the public and
mm.
my research, and I hit fast forward, and it's the same shot for almost an hour. And I'm like, what the heck is this? I play it at normal speed from the beginning, and then I hear a third track of audio telling the astronauts not to answer NASA until they count off 4 seconds to make it look like a radio delay that they're beyond Earth orbit, which they're not. You can see the Earth outside the window, and they're using a 1 foot model floating in space. And when the lights come up and it's a 1 foot model, I'm like, oh my gosh, they really didn't go to the moon, because they're faking being halfway to the moon from Earth orbit, which means they can't leave Earth orbit. Whatever the Saturn V equipment was, it can't leave Earth orbit, which means none of the missions ever went. I thought, well, maybe they faked the first one and later went. No. If your Volkswagen Bug can't go 500 miles an hour, mine can't either, because they came off the same assembly line. All the Saturn V's were the same. If theirs cannot leave Earth orbit, which is proving because they're faking being halfway to the moon, then they never went. And that famous picture on the homepage of Sibrel.com of the shadows intersecting at 90 degrees, that's from the quote, last mission to the moon. So that's when I knew for certain they didn't go, and it just broke my heart. I mean, I literally wept. I'm like, "Oh, how sad."
I was gonna
They
ask you.
really did fake the moon landing. Oh my gosh. How pathetic.
So was it hard on you? Was it psychologically and maybe spiritually? Was it a tough time? Like, did you have to, was it some time for you to grasp the whole thing? Was it like life changing in that regard?
Well, that moment was life-changing, because the next moment after my heart was crushed for mankind being so depraved that they would fake the moon landing. Then I realized, oh my gosh, I have proof that they faked the moon landing in my house. What have I got myself into? I'm in deep trouble. And
Hmm.
sure enough, I was followed from church that night. I was apprehended by government agents outside of CNN trying to get the videotape of the fake footage to a reporter there. I was given true serum,
Could you?
interrogated,
I'm
and
so
all this.
sorry. Could you? I'm so sorry for interrupting you. Can you please tell that story, because it's such a like vivid and scary story, man. You're leaving church, right?